All right, let's dive into something that every single one of us has experienced: fear. But we're not just talking about jump scares. We're going to get into the science of how our brains actually learn to be afraid of things that really shouldn't scare us at all.
I mean, think about it for a second. That sound, that high pitched whine, it doesn't physically hurt you, right? So why do you get that jolt? Why does your heart start pounding? Well, that simple question gets right to the core of a fascinating process that's happening inside our heads.
And science has a name for this: Pavlovian fear conditioning. It sounds kind of technical, but the idea is actually super simple. It's this powerful way we learn where something totally neutral, like a sound or even a smell, gets rewired in our brain to become a warning sign, all because it was once connected to something genuinely bad. So, how does this whole rewiring thing actually work? Well, scientists have broken it down into three simple steps. First, you've got the unconditional stimulus, or US for short. That's the thing that's actually unpleasant, like a mild shock in a lab study. Then there's the conditional stimulus, the CS. That's the neutral part, like a simple beeping tone. Now, if you pair that beep with a shock enough times, pretty soon the beep by itself starts to trigger the conditional response, and that's the feeling of fear itself. Okay, so we know what's happening, but where in the brain does this all go down? To figure that out, we've got to take a look inside the brain's specialized fear circuitry.
Yeah, fear isn't just one little spot in the brain, it's a whole network of players working together. We're talking about key areas like the amygdala, which is like our threat detector, the hippocampus, our memory hub, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which kind of helps manage our emotional reaction. But out of all of them, there's one undisputed star of the show.
And that star is the amygdala. You can think of it as the brain's command center for fear. It's absolutely essential for learning about threats, storing those fear memories, and, this is the important part, expressing them. The research is pretty clear. Without a working amygdala, this whole fear conditioning thing just doesn't happen. So, how are we so sure the amygdala is really the command center? Well, this is where it gets really cool. Let's zoom right in and see how scientists can literally watch fear happen in the brain in real time. This gets to a really critical question that researchers wanted to answer. Is the amygdala just like a memory chip that stores the fact that, say, a tone predicts a shock? Or is it directly responsible for that gut level, heart pounding feeling of fear that we actually experience? To figure that out, they needed a way to objectively measure fear, and they used something called skin conductance response, or SCR. It basically just measures the tiny changes and how much you sweat. So when a person heard the danger signal, sometimes their SCR would spike. Scientists call that a response trial, but other times it wouldn't. And what they found, well, it's right here, and it's incredible. Look at the brain scans on the right. That bright orange area, that's the amygdala lighting up. Now, check out the graphs below. In the trials labeled response, the ones where the person physically showed fear by sweating, boom, you see this huge spike in amygdala activity. But in the non-response trials, even though the person knew the threat was coming, the amygdala stayed quiet. This was the smoking gun. So here's the takeaway, and it's a big one. The amygdala isn't just a quiet little memory bank. Its activity is directly tied to the real-time physical expression of fear. It's the difference between knowing there's a fire drill and feeling that shot of adrenaline that makes you want to get up and run. Okay, so the amygdala expresses fear, but does it react the same way to everything? Or does our brain maybe have a built-in bias for certain kinds of danger over others? To test this, another research team had people look at two different kinds of scary pictures. One type was angry or fearful human faces, a social threat. The other type was threatening scenes from the environment, things like snarling dogs or plane crashes. And the results were really striking. As you can see on this chart, while the amygdala definitely reacted to both kinds of threats, its response was way, way stronger when people were looking at the threatening human faces. So what does that tell us? Well, it strongly suggests that our brains might be hardwired with this special sensitivity to social threats. It makes sense, right? For us to survive as a social species, being able to instantly read fear or anger on someone else's face was and still is absolutely critical. Now, let's zoom out a bit, because this fear system isn't something that's just set in stone. It actually changes as we grow up, and it might even be influenced by generations that came before us. You see, our ability to learn, and just as importantly, to unlearn fear, changes throughout our lives. As infants, our ability to form these fear connections is pretty limited.
Then you get to adolescence, and it's fascinating. Teenagers can learn fear just fine, but they seem to have a much harder time getting rid of it. And in adulthood, the whole system tends to get more stable. But what if we zoom out even further? I mean, what if the things our parents learned to be afraid of could somehow be passed down to us without us ever having experienced the threat ourselves? Now, it sounds like something out of science fiction, but a really amazing experiment in mice showed that it might actually be possible. Scientists taught mice to be afraid of a specific smell. Then, they looked at their children. And incredibly, the next generation showed a real fear of that exact same smell, even though they had never, ever been exposed to it before. It's like a biological memory was passed down. So it's clear that our fear response isn't some simple one-size-fits-all program. It's this complex system that's constantly being tuned by things like our stage of life, our genetics, and especially our past experiences with stress, which can seriously ramp up how we learn to be afraid later on. So, why does all this matter? Why do we care about brain circuits and mouse experiments? Well, because understanding this blueprint, this instruction manual for fear, is the key to helping real people in their real lives. When you think about it, conditions like PTSD, specific phobias, and anxiety disorders, at their very core, they're all problems with this fear learning system. They represent a fear circuit that's become overactive, or it's gotten stuck on, or it just can't unlearn a threat that's no longer there. By understanding the mechanics, we can figure out better ways to fix it. And that's not just a hopeful idea. The scientists doing this work say it directly. Their research, and I'm quoting here, promises to inform new treatments. The whole goal of mapping out this system is to eventually be able to help people rewrite it. And that really brings us to the final, most important thought. When you stop thinking of fear as some mysterious force and start seeing it for what it is, a biological program that is learned and stored in our brains, it's actually incredibly empowering because it means that what can be learned can potentially be unlearned. The question is no longer if we can rewrite the code of fear, but simply how.